Perfect.
And then there's a couple more people in the waiting room.
Okay. So again, thanks for joining us on your weekend today. Just to let you know, the meeting is being recorded and we're offering attendance virtually through Zoom as well. And today we just wanted to meet and give you an update on the Sitka Sedge Tidal Wetland Restoration Project. And my name is Jason Elkins. I'm the park manager at Cape Lookout Management Unit, which also oversees management of Sitka Sedge State Natural Area. And then just to briefly introduce everybody that will be presenting, we have Noel Batchelor, and he is OPRD's Natural Resource Specialist out of our headquarters. And then Jena, Jena. Noel will be covering the beginning of the project and research that's already been done and how we've got to the point that we are now. And then Jena Christiansen is project manager for Tillamook Estuary Partnership, and she will be discussing where we're going to be going in the next few years. And then Hunter White, is with the Environmental Associates.
ESA, Environmental Sciences.
There you go. Thank you. And he will be discussing, what kind of the technical side of where we're going in the next couple of years. How we're moving forward with that. And then we have Dave Shibley from Nestucca, Nestolin, Sand Lake Watershed Group. And they are working on the stream restoration side of the project, and he's here to answer any questions that anybody has on that. And we have a lot of material to go through, about an hour and a half to get through that. So we do ask if you have any questions, if you can keep those in mind and hold those until the end. We should have about 20 or 30 minutes to address any questions. But thanks for being here.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me advance this slide if I can figure out how to do that. So, as Jason said, I'll be talking about the background, how we got to where we are now, all the water that's been under the bridge and through the dike, so to speak, in the last 8 years. And I'll start off with setting the stage of Sitka Sedge State Natural Area. So, I'm sure everyone knows this already, but just for those who may not. The red boundary is the Sitka Sedge State Natural Area boundary. And then let me see if I can use this mouse as a pointer here. Belts Dike is this black line here. Tide Gate is right here. Reneke Creek is right here. Belts Creek, we'll refer to all of these creeks and features in the course of this talk. This is No Name Creek. East Marsh is a name that has been relatively recently coined for this area, just to be able to talk about it. We have the ditch along Sand Lake Road, and then another artificial channel that goes through the northern part of Tierra del Mar into Sitka Sedge along this alignment. Tierra del Mar, of course, being this area down here. And now, how did I do that advanced slide thing? This way. All right, so the why. Why do we need to do anything? Well, first and foremost, the existing tide gate is failing. It's really falling apart. And you see the pictures over here on the right-hand side show this is the outside of the dike. This is the north side of the dike, tide gate with the flap here. And this is inside the dike. And you can see that the amount of erosion that has occurred around the end of the box culvert and the wing walls here is pretty extensive. This is cut back 6-8 feet and really has eroded a lot of the structure of the dike in the vicinity of the tide gate. The rules for construction and repair of tide gates are such that there's a certain threshold that you can get to with reconstruction of a feature as it is, and beyond that, if you exceed that threshold for the material that you replace, fish passage requirements are triggered, and that fish passage trigger requires something other than this style of tide gate, which is outdated and has too fast of water moving through it, especially given its current condition. Another thing I would note about this tide gate is that the flap has been missing various numbers of boards over the last few years and is passing a lot of water. It's not holding seawater out anymore. It seems to be completely open now, so water can pass inward unobstructed. The other thing that I would say about this is that the current tide gate is undersized. So the area behind the dike is pretty large, and the whole opening to drain that is a 4x4 box culvert. So what this in effect does is it creates an hourglass effect at the tide gate. So there's a restriction there. Water can't move through it fast enough for it to be in constant equilibrium with the tide. And you get this hourglass effect, either water waiting outside the dike and pouring through like a fire hose to get in, or vice versa on the outgoing tide, a bunch of water held inside the dike that has to pass through this narrow opening to get out. And that fire hose is what's contributing to this erosion that we're seeing on the sides of the dike here. There's also some indication that the sides of this box culvert have holes or gaps in it, and that the box culvert is structurally unsound. That has not been scuba dived or camera scoped or anything like that, but you can see little eddies of water swirling on the sides of the box culvert that seem to suggest that. So I already mentioned fish passage, and a lot of that fish passage requirement there is about velocity. So juvenile fish can only swim against a certain speed of water running through the tide gate. And with this small opening and with this hourglass effect, driving the hydraulics there to really high water velocities, there's only a short period of time in slack zones when fish are able to move, when fish that can't swim really fast are able to swim through that unobstructed way. So the tide gate would need to be much larger to allow the velocities to be low enough for juvenile fish to enter and exit. Then the last thing I would mention is that the existing dike has settled in some areas. There are portions of the dike that are only less than a foot above the king tides. It's not most of the dike, but there are portions of the dike that are only a few inches above the highest recorded tides. And the dike was constructed to a standard that no longer meets current flood control standards. All right, so let's see, down. So here are some of the major milestones, things that we've completed in the last 8 years since the property's been in OPRD ownership. In September 2014, that's when State Parks acquired the property. Then shortly thereafter, we started our resource assessments, which included biological assessments, archaeological assessments, recreation and scenic assessments. The master planning effort started shortly after that, taking advantage of the resource assessments that were done shortly after acquisition. And it became very obvious that a hydrological study was going to be needed, and took on several forms over the course of the next few years, starting with some surface water assessment and then an initial groundwater assessment for Tierra del Mar. And then after completion of that early phase of hydrological monitoring, we entered into a more detailed hydrological groundwater study event in 2017 to 2019. After completion of the hydrological study, we convened a technical team of experts in various disciplines related to ecology, as well as local stakeholders, landowners, Tierra del Mar owners, neighbors, and went through an exercise of scoring and ranking a few alternatives, which I'll describe in a slide that's coming up soon, to see which alternative had the most pros and the fewest cons that we could move forward with. Then in February 2020, we presented the findings of the technical team to the Tillamook County Commissioners in a meeting right there, right next door. And then in March of 2020, OPRD made a decision to select a setback dike alternative as the preferred alternative to study more. 2020 was supposed to be a year of finding grants and moving forward, but we don't know what happened in 2020. Not much got done that year. And in 2021 and 2022, TEP was able to secure some grants that allowed the design phase to move forward. And in 2022, ESA was hired to start to take a look at the design and all of the types of data that will be required to move through the design process. So that skeletal structure of milestones is more basic than what was reality. It was a lot more complicated. And I don't expect anybody to read this, but just to say it was a complicated process over the last 8 years. So the assessments that we've completed over the last 8 years include modeling of surface water response to different dike modification scenarios, the assessment of groundwater interaction with surface water. So what does Tierra del Mar groundwater do under the various alteration scenarios? We assessed current habitat and its condition and its conservation value, and then how that habitat would change in response to the altered hydrology under each of the modification scenarios. We've done cultural resource, archaeological assessments, wildlife value assessments, recreational use and development assessments, water quality monitoring, and then the limiting factors analysis was completed by the Watershed Council and its contractor. And during the course of this process, we've had a lot of outreach to stakeholders. I recognize a lot of faces here, and we've had 19 or so stakeholder meetings over the last 8 years. We've had news releases to newspapers. We have our website, which is updated frequently and contains all the most up-to-date information on all of the modeling and reports and conclusions and decisions that have been made. We have an email mailing list, and anyone who would like to be included on that mailing list is welcome to sign in on the table in the back, or those of you who are participating via Zoom can give us your contact information that way to be sure to be copied on all email correspondence. We've also had some meetings with adjacent landowners that have property elevations that are within the tidal range, see how they feel about the various alternatives, and then, of course, frequent correspondence with the TDM Association. So the action alternatives and the no action alternatives that we have assessed in the last few years include, in the upper left, no action alternative, which is kind of the control, if you will, where you don't do anything, just leave it alone. We'll use that as a point of comparison to the other alternatives. The second alternative, sort of maximum alternative, is dike breach. And then there's intermediate alternatives of replacing the existing tide gate with a muted tidal regulator, which is a modern tide gate, which has a set closure point that allows you to control how much water can come in and to control the velocities that will flow through it. And then we also considered the setback dike alternative, which is to replace the function of the existing Belts dike up here with a setback dike closer to Tierra del Mar and built taller, broader, and to higher flood control standards. And this alternative is not depicted accurately here. Hunter will get into this in his presentation, but this is just an approximate location just for visual. That is yet to be determined where the location of that would actually sit. So the surface water effects, sorry, I can't read the whole slide because of some interactive features with this Zoom meeting, but the surface water effects are basically summarized like this. The existing dike and tide gate has this hourglass effect that I mentioned, where water backs up either inside or outside and then has to get through this narrow hole and has to blast through there like a fire hose. In a storm event, like a 100-year flood, a 50-year flood, or even a 10-year flood, water can back up inside the dike for days on end before it's able to get out. It keeps getting replenished by new storm water and by tidal influx, and water just kind of stays in. And that'll be demonstrated here in a minute. And under the breach, there would be new tidal inundation of areas that are within the natural tide range that had previously been closed off from tidal action because of the tide gate. So the tide can get up to maybe 11, 12, and there are portions of a couple of private properties that have elevations that low. Most of Tierra del Mar is significantly higher than that. There are two main properties that are low, and only a portion of those two properties are low. Then the modern tide gate scenario. So we analyzed two different closure set points for the modern tide gates. One would close at 7 feet of water outside of the dike. So when the water outside of the dike reaches a certain point, that forces the doors to close, and the water inside the dike is not allowed to go higher than 7 feet. We also analyzed an 8-foot closure setting. Same thing, closes at 8 feet instead of 7 feet. And we actually looked at 9 and 10 in a real preliminary way, but the benefit versus cost on that was not there. So we really only assessed 7 and 8 in detail. So under the 7-foot closure point scenario, the water would stay within the existing tidal channels and not go over the banks onto the flood. So it's not of as much benefit to fish if the fish have to stay inside those creek channels. They want to get up outside of those creek channels and find food and shelter and velocities out in the marsh vegetation. So that is a con against that. For 8-foot closure setting, that allows the water to get up over the tops of those tidal channel banks a little bit, but limits the amount of flooding that would be seen on private properties, etc. And then a setback dike would allow everything north of that setback dike to be a natural estuary with natural tidal levels, and it would be confined to the public property, but the setback dike itself would prevent higher water levels, full tidal water levels in the Tierra del Mar. So a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And so here's a video. That must be worth several thousand. Let me set the stage here on the screen here. In the upper left, this frame, so all 4 of these frames here are the same thing, but they depict different levels of water under the different scenarios. This is all surface water. The upper left is the existing condition. The middle left is a modern tide gate with an 8-foot closure setting, which allows it to get over the top of the tidal channel banks. The middle right is the breach scenario, and then the right-hand frame is the setback dike scenario, and the black line represents an approximate location for the setback dike. On the bottom here is the hydrograph. This shows the elevation of the surface of the water under each of those scenarios. And you can see the daily high tide and the lower high, and these are, here's one day, here's another day. And you can see that, I don't know if the colors come through, but the highest one, this is the elevation of the natural estuary. This is the breach alternative. The two modern tide gate, for the modern tide gate and the setback dike scenarios, they follow that exactly until they hit that set point, and then they truncate, so they don't go higher. And then this green line is the water surface elevation that is seen in the existing condition. As you can see, it's shifted in terms of time, and it's wider. The water stays in longer, so it takes time to get in, and then it takes time to go out. So that explains why it's wider like that. The blue here is a storm event, and this is a significant storm event. It's not a 100-year storm event, but it's not an annual rainstorm. There's off the screen here, there is a 100-year storm event, which will be depicted. So with that, I'm going to start this running. Hopefully it works. So note here on the existing condition that it took a long time for water to come in, and then it stays in longer after it's already gone out in these other scenarios. That's kind of an average, normal, everyday tide situation. And then as we get into this storm event where this water comes in, you will see the curious effect of it backing up and staying in for an extended amount of time. Another couple of things to watch are down here in East Marsh, how far the water goes up into East Marsh under each of the scenarios. You'll see that the breach, it goes up higher under kind of regular tides than it would with the modern tide gate or the setback dike. But there are a couple of surprises with that too under major storm events where the water can actually be the highest in East Marsh under the existing condition rather than under a breach situation. So as you can see here, the water has stayed in for a long time, several days in a row under this storm event. And here comes the gully washer. This storm event over here is a 100-year storm event. This is taken from actual storm and surface water flow rain records and scaled to be at a level of a 100-year flood. So water finally subsiding under the existing condition. And now here comes the 100-year flood. You can see, you can watch this East Marsh under each of these really high tides. So here we're getting into a crazy high tide, over 12 feet. So look how far it comes back under the breach scenario. It came way back up into here, but also look where it is under existing condition. It's getting up there and it's staying. So then under this 100-year flood scenario, the water flushes back out within hours under any of the action alternatives and stays in under the no action. Another thing to note here is that under the setback dike versus the modern tide gate scenarios, the modern tide gate drains out a little bit slower than the setback dike situation because of the lesser amount of water that's held behind this dike versus this one. And that's probably all we see on that. So in terms of groundwater, well, these are the findings of our groundwater study. Let me set the scene here on what these two figures represent. The left-hand picture is an east-west cross-section through Tierra del Mar. So this is Sand Lake Road right here. This is the foredune. This is the neighborhood. This is East Marsh over here. And these lines that are vertical here are groundwater monitoring wells that we drilled in 2017. This brown line right here is a clay layer that separates two separate aquifers. There's an upper surface water aquifer and a deeper aquifer that don't interact too much. And other thing to note here is that the water that is perched above this clay layer flows according to the slope, and it was determined that there was a groundwater divide where some portions of the groundwater in Tierra del Mar flowed towards the ocean and other portions flowed towards East Marsh. Then on the north-south cross-section, Tierra del Mar is here. This is Sitka Sedge State Natural Area here. The clay area slopes downward to the north, and the groundwater flows towards the north. So the general effects of groundwater interacting with surface water, basically it's characterized by the general statement that groundwater does interact with surface water, but it's really slow. The ground is just not porous enough for it to be a flashy effect where it can take place immediately. There's a time delay and there's a dampening effect. And during average tides, a breach might result in up to a 1/4 inch of an increase in groundwater levels in the surface aquifer close to the marsh. So on the north end of Tierra del Mar, there might be as much as a 1/4 inch increase in water table elevation according to the hydrological studies that were done based on groundwater wells and correlating the surface water in the marsh with the water levels in the wells that were recorded simultaneously. Then the other more interesting factor here is that during a storm or major tide event, the breach would result in a decrease in the water levels close to Sitka Sedge State Natural Area because of the fact that the water doesn't hang out there for days. Surface water doesn't get ponded up in that bathtub and they sit there for days on end. It's able to get out fast enough that it doesn't have time to influence the surface aquifer of the groundwater. And under both average tides and during major storm events, modern tide gate and setback dike would result in decreased water table elevations relative to the existing condition. So putting all that together, these are the lists of pros and cons in a real simplified way. It's more complicated than this. There were lots of spreadsheets and scoring forms that we assessed in the process of the technical team process in 2019. But to summarize, no action alternative didn't really have any good pros because of the fact that it's not going to last. I mean, the existing tide gate is falling apart. It's not really a great option to just leave it be. What's that? Okay. And the cons of the no action alternative would be that it would have the least benefit and the highest risk, and that the dike will eventually, or the tide gate and possibly portions of the dike will eventually fail, particularly from sea level rise. The existing dike is undersized. Then for the dike breach scenario, the pro is that it has the highest ecological value for the estuary and fish. But the cons are that there are a couple of private properties that would receive surface water inundation during high tides that don't currently see that tidal influx. Also, justifiably so, people are concerned about it. There's also an increased frequency of flooding on Sand Lake Road, and it could have impacts on recreation access. In terms of the modern tide gate, replacing the existing tide gate in the current Belts dike with a new, more modern structure and keeping the existing dike. The pros there are that it does limit the tide on private properties. It lets stormwater out efficiently, so we won't have that back flooding, that bathtub that just stays full behind the dike for days on end. The cons are that with the 7-foot closure setting, the water stays within the tidal channel, doesn't float over the banks, doesn't allow fish to get out onto the marsh and take advantage of the food sources out in the vegetation. And for the 8-foot closure setting, there are benefits that the fish are allowed to get out into some of that habitat. It's not as pronounced as it would be under a full natural estuarine condition in elevations between 8 and 10 or 11 feet in the areas that are safe to have that type of water surface elevation. Then for the setback dike, the pros are that the fish passage and salmon rearing habitat benefits are second only to those of the full breach. So very positive fish and ecological benefits. It gives much higher protection to Tierra del Mar than the existing dike, in that it would be built taller into modern flood control standards. And the stormwater drainage from Tierra del Mar would be able to get out. And because of the fact that the setback dike would be constructed so far back, and with Reneke Creek and Belts Creek outside of that dike, there wouldn't be as much stormwater to have to store during the periods of time when the tide gates are closed. So it could be a smaller modern tide gate and a less expensive tide gate. The cons to the setback dike alternative would be that it would be constructed through high value wetland habitat, would take permits and possibly some mitigation to be able to build this giant earthen structure in the middle of a high value wetland. There would also potentially be some recreation impacts. The trails would not still connect the way they do now. And it would be the most expensive option overall. So in March 2020, upon reviewing all of these alternatives and their pros and cons, OPRD leadership decided to pursue the setback dike option for the future and to move it forward through grant acquisition and design processes, and just really flesh it out and understand it and to develop real designs. And I didn't have a place to put this graphic on the previous slide because it's large, but this really paints the picture of what we're talking about with the setback dike. That the yellow here is kind of an average cross section of the existing dike. The orange is the cross section of the existing dike at its lowest point. So the setback dike is this profile, much wider, much more stable and higher than either the low point or the existing dike top. So obviously it has much more room to grow in terms of sea level rise that might be expected over the long term. So next steps for OPRD. OPRD is now passing the torch to TEP to continue to work through the design and potentially implementation phases if it comes to that. TEP has a lot of capacity and expertise in working on these large hydrological projects and a lot more capacity than OPRD does to shepherd this. TEP also has access to a wider range of grant opportunities that OPRD is not eligible to apply for. And it's important to note that what we've been talking about so far is the estuarine side of this whole project. So this is all about Belts Marsh and Belts Dike and Setback Dike, but we're not talking so much about Menike and Belts Creeks and no-name creeks at this point. That portion of the project will likely be shepherded by Tillamook County Public Works or the Watershed Council or both. That hasn't been figured out yet. But for now, we're dealing with the estuarine side, and we'll deal with the creeks when opportunity arises. OPRD is not going away. We're going to continue to be part of this process. We'll be part of all of the stakeholder outreach and design considerations and decision-making as a landowner. And we're here for the long haul. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jena.
Hello, everyone. So where are we going? Next steps. I'm Jena Christiansen. I'm Habitat Restoration Project Manager with TEP that has inherited this project. Noel's been doing a great job at getting me up to speed to where we're at now. So my role is working very closely with state parks, making sure that as property owners, we are including them in every aspect of decision-making and also reaching out to the community and addressing your concerns and taking into consideration to the neighbors as our stakeholders. So this is an overview of the large general elements of this project. Right now, we're focusing on Belts Dike, Belts Marsh, and the Tierra del Mar flood protection and stormwater controls to make sure that we're addressing any issues with those two components. And then there's the Sand Lake Road culvert improvements that will be addressed at a later point. Right now, the county is moving forward with designs on Menike Creek crossing since that culvert is the most tenuous. It's also far enough north that it won't be impacted by the setback dike option, so they can start working on design work for that, that particular road crossing. The other two will likely be impacted by where the setback dike ends up being located. So once we need to know where that's going to land before we can move forward with those two crossings. So all of these components here are going to be taken into consideration with the modeling work that we're moving into right now under various scenarios. Flooding, king tides, all those other inputs. So this is the overall broad project schedule. So far, what's been done are feasibility studies and OPRD making a decision on the general approach to the project and what needs to be done. And this is where we are. We're in phase 1 of design work for the dike breach and the setback dike. So currently we have funding for this portion of the project through next August. That's the contract that we have with ESA. They're the engineering firm that's going to be carrying out the studies and design work for this. As you can see, this is a long process. We're going into 30% design, phase 2 is 60% design, then we'll go through final design and permitting, and then finally phase 4 is construction implementation. And as long as we get the funding that we need to continue to move this project forward, this is the timeline that we're looking at, so you guys can have an idea of the scale. And then once the project's done with construction, we'll go into post-construction monitoring, which is typically required by the funders. So we're not just going to come in and do a bunch of stuff and walk away. We'll be on site for several years after to make sure that we're taking into account any changes or impacts that this project has on both Belts Marsh and Tierra. And there will be meetings like this through this entire process. We plan on holding these town hall style meetings at least 3 times a year from now until into project monitoring, so that you all can be informed and we have the opportunity to gather your input and answer questions. And it'll be the same style, hopefully hybrid, in person, online, and everything will be recorded and made available to the public so that you can go back and watch meetings if you miss them, or have questions. You can go look at what was discussed. And so this is the current funding that we have for phase 1. It's covered by 3 different grants: Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, which is state funding, the Nature Conservancy's PGE Habitat Support Fund, and then Restore America's Estuaries Coastal Watersheds Grant, which is actually under the umbrella of EPA. So these are our funding sources. This is what we have to pay for phase 1 right now. So this entire project is going to end up being grant funded through grants that I applied for. We'll have a little bit of money coming in from hopefully U.S. Fish and Wildlife and some match from partners, but the bulk of the project is going to be grant funded through these state and national grants. So these are potential future funders. You can see there are state, OWEB is state, the other ones are all national. These are grants that I've applied for: the NOAA grant, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and Watershed grants are grants that I will be writing and submitting. There's also many new grant opportunities that are coming up within the next year or 2 that are funded by the federal IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law by some people. And then the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed is going to have a whole bunch of money for infrastructure type projects, which the habitat restoration aspect, that falls under more ecological restoration, but under infrastructure, we have Tierra stormwater, we have setback dike, and we have Sand Lake Road, which is the county public road. So we will be eligible for funds under these new grant opportunities as they come up. So I'll keep you all posted when we do secure funding. In each meeting, I will be sure to be disclosing where the money is coming from. And so one quick comment in the chat, the folks online asked to identify how many community members were here in person. I see 7 faces. So to answer that question, there are 7 community members here. And with that, I will pass it over to Hunter White, who's going to be the principal engineer on this project. And I'm sure if you've been around, you've seen his face. He's done some of the initial work for Oregon Parks, and he continues with us today.
Thanks, Jena.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hunter White.
Let's see here, I'm a principal civil and water resources engineer with ESA. I did work on the previous hydrologic study with Pacific Groundwater Group as well. So happy to be continuing to work on this project. So just a quick overview of our timeline and tasks that we'll be conducting as part of this phase of the project. The big focus here is really a much more detailed modeling effort and a more detailed alternatives analysis. As Jena and Noel laid out, the previous phase really set the stage for what the big picture preferred alternative is, and now we're really dialing in to find details about the setback dike, dike breach, and other associated restoration and infrastructure improvement features. We'll be doing data collection, field work, and conducting our modeling effort and alternatives analysis through March of 2023. That's when we'll be reporting back to you all again, really with the findings of kind of the next level of alternatives and modeling. After that, we'll be working with the stakeholders to develop the much more detailed, comprehensive preferred alternative with all the associated elements, and be advancing that to 30% design level, moving towards construction documents. And as you can see here on the bottom, these are, we have 3 pairs of technical advisory meetings, as well as town hall meetings, including this one here. So we have 3 meetings planned as part of this phase of the project. So this is kind of an overview of our work plan for this phase. And really, again, the main goal of this phase is to refine the elements of the preferred alternative through 2D hydrodynamic modeling and a detailed alternatives analysis. We'll be using HECRAS HECRAS 2D for the modeling effort. We're doing additional topographic and bathymetric survey data collection. We'll be doing additional water level monitoring as well, and evaluating different configurations for the primary features of the project under a range of different storm scenarios, tidal scenarios, as Jena mentioned, getting into extreme events with king tides, as well as looking at future projections with climate change and sea level rise. We'll be refining the key elements of these alternatives. Again, the setback dike, flood protection measures, the location and size of a dike breach and channel connecting Belts Marsh to Sand Lake, and looking at internal site enhancements such as potentially filling some of the linear drainage ditches and reconstructing more sinuous tidal channels that once occupied the site, as well as other vegetation and habitat enhancements. And then, as we mentioned a couple times, the Sand Lake Road improvements, including culvert replacements at Reneke Creek and Belts Creek and No Name Creek, are being moved forward as a separate project with other involvement. We will also be taking a very detailed look at the stormwater drainage system in Tierra del Mar. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in a moment. So, as you know, we did a fair amount of modeling in the previous phases of the work. And over the next few slides, I'm just going to give you an example or a little bit more detail about the modeling that's been done to date and the more detailed modeling we'll be doing in the future. The model used in the previous study is called a hydrologic budget model, or commonly referred to as the bucket model. Essentially is imagining that Belts Marsh behind the dike is a single basin, a bucket, if you will. It has the inflows from the creeks, Reneke, Belts, and East Marsh, or No Name Creek, as well as runoff coming in from Tierra del Mar. And then at the dike interface, here we have flow in and out through the existing culvert and tide gate. And essentially with that model, it was a time step model that calculated how much water is stored behind the existing dike and what resulting water level occurs under those different volumes contained. So with that model, it only reports one single water surface elevation for the entire marsh, and it didn't provide any information about velocity or erosion potential throughout different areas of the model domain. This is an example from another project that I'm working on, and detail of how we set up a 2D model. You can see here these grids laid out across the entire surface. This is a valley in Southwest Washington. And you can see here along the channels, there's much more definition and smaller grid cells to be able to provide higher resolution of information at every point along the model domain. So for example, when we run this model, we'll be able to see velocities at specific bends or specific locations, as well as embankments such as the setback dike or the roadway. We can look at not only water levels, but also velocity and shear stress, which is an indication of erosion potential. I have just a couple quick examples of 2D models running, just so you can kind of see. Noel generated the really nice inundation mapping of the previous modeling work. But what you can see in this model, similar to that inundation extent, the colors that you see here are velocities. And so on this site, we're getting much higher velocities in the channel itself than out on the marsh plain. This is about a 300-acre site, so we're really zoomed out here. But if you zoom in, you can also see the flow direction and velocity vectors, or direction and magnitude of velocity of water moving through the system. This is just another quick example, another site in Washington. And here you can, again, kind of see the higher concentration of these arrows are velocities, high velocity vectors. This model here actually included salinity modeling as well. But again, so you can just see a lot more resolution of information. And again, rather than just one static water level across the entire domain, you get really, really fine resolution of information. We'll also be conducting hydrologic modeling using HEC-HMS, which essentially translate rainfall data into water running off. So we'll be defining all of the subbasins within the watershed, as well as within Tierra del Mar, and modeling rainfall events and how those basins will generate water into the project area. So this is an initial concept graphic that we've developed, highlighting what the key elements of the design are that we'll really be looking at defining here. Starting from the bottom, and really the way tidal water will move in through the site, is looking at Belts Dike and determining the ideal location and size for a dike breach. We'll get into some factors we'll consider for that here in a moment. One key factor, though, is Belts Dike currently is the trail connection from the parking lot and trailhead out to the rest of the trail network. So with any dike breaching alternatives, we need to also understand how we'll maintain that recreational access, through pedestrian bridges or potentially a boardwalk. And again, I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Excuse me. And by the way, this image is flipped around, so we've got north down, just to kind of reorient people. We have Tierra del Mar at the top of the screen here to the south. So at the south end of Belts Marsh, we're looking at where should this setback dike go. The initial work that was done was kind of a high-level assessment on where an initial location that was selected, and initial analysis to demonstrate that that location is feasible. But now, as we're getting into the details, we're wanting to look at optimizing the location of that setback dike to minimize impacts to the wetlands, as Noel was mentioning, but also make sure that there's enough storage within that system to contain stormwater runoff without raising water levels at Sand Lake Road or at the edge of Tierra. Again, we'll also be looking at other interior enhancements. This is just a conceptual tidal channel network, loosely based on the oldest historical aerial photos we could find of what the channel network looked like before it was modified. Other vegetation and habitat enhancements, and then again, the sand lake road culverts as a separate project, showing here future culvert replacements at Renfrew Creek, Belts Creek, and East Marsh. So with the location and configuration of the setback dike, again, it will provide protection against the highest water levels that occur in the Sand Lake, but it also needs to store the water that's running off into the system behind the setback dike. We want to minimize wetland impacts, and additional factors we'll be looking at will be considering groundwater upwelling locations and geotechnical conditions in the marsh where this new setback dike would run across, to evaluate whether the geotechnical conditions are stable or sufficient, or what measures would be needed to make a setback dike stable there. We'll also be looking at tie-in locations on the west side, how does it tie into the dune, the forested dune area, and on the east end, how does it tie into Sand Lake Road for maintenance and construction logistics. With the dike breaching element, in the previous effort, we defined what the minimum size of a dike breach should be for fish passage. Noel mentioned the velocities moving through that channel, keeping them low enough for fish to comfortably move through. But now we will also be looking at, what is the appropriate size and location to promote natural tidal circulation and sediment dynamics. One factor for marshes, generally, diked marshes tend to subside, the ground surface lowers. And in natural marshes, there's a process called sediment or marsh accretion, where sediment deposits across the marsh surface and actually raises the land surface over time. And with sea level rise prospects, it's important to understand that this marsh will be able to keep pace with sea level rise. So we're taking a detailed look at hydraulics, how the water moves through the area, and how that may affect sediment transport processes. And then, as I said, we'll also be evaluating the stormwater drainage system in Tierra del Mar to define the inputs to Belts Marsh, as well as identify potential improvements to that system that could be conducted in association with this project. So as I mentioned here, kind of zooming in a little bit on the setback dike location, and this one here that's most northern at the bottom of the image here is essentially where the setback dike was drawn in the previous phase. And as I was describing, not only will the setback dike prevent tide water from reaching Tierra del Mar, but during a storm event, we have all of this water running off of the watershed into the East Marsh, as well as down the Sand Lake Road culvert, and really just run off of Tierra del Mar in general. During a storm event, all of that water is contained in the area behind the setback dike. Noel mentioned there would be a tide gate on the setback dike as well. So when the water level in the marsh is up, the tide gate will be closed. And during that time, roughly 8 hours or so, water will be pouring into this basin behind the setback dike. And so we'll be looking at 100-year storm events and future projections of more extreme storm events to make sure that where we site the setback dike will have enough storage to contain all of that water without raising water levels at Sand Lake Road or in Tierra del Mar. The initial location was determined to be feasible based on an assessment, but again, we're really looking to optimize that and minimize impacts to the wetlands. There are also a lot of other logistics to consider, including where the setback dike would tie in on either side, potential for additional trails connected and running on top of the setback dike, depending on where that ends up, looking at alternative locations for the setback dike alignment to potentially push it further south to minimize the amount of wetland cut off by the setback dike, as well as just direct impacts by the footprint. As Noel showed, a new setback dike would have much flatter side slopes for stability, and therefore it has a wider footprint, so it would actually have direct wetland impacts. Looking at the dike breach, we want to determine where's the best location for that and also the size. This is kind of zoomed in at that area, and you can see, well, over here to the right, the east is actually the location of the existing culvert and tide gate. And you can kind of see the little scour pools that have developed on either side because the pipe is so small that it really causes scour, high velocities, and erosion on either side. Looking at the overall channel patterns and connecting the channels in Sand Lake to the channels within Belts Marsh, more likely a breach would be kind of over here in the center, lining up with these other channels. And that, this is kind of the most likely location for a breach. We do also want to look at potential for other historical tidal subbasins that may have also drained directly into Sand Lake. So that'll be part of our detailed analysis there. Again, just referencing the historical conditions, the setback deck was already there in 1939, the oldest area we can find. But you can, as I zoom in here a little bit, you can see old remnant tidal channels. You can see the initial excavation of the linear ditch, and these really prominent main tidal, primary tidal channels are visible in that 1939 area as well. Another key aspect of where the dike gets breached and what the size is, as I said, maintaining the belt stack trail connection from the Sitka Sedge parking lot and trailhead here. As most of you know, this is the main or the primary connection point out to the rest of the trail network in the park. And so with a dike breach, we would be looking at maintaining that access either with a pedestrian bridge over the dike breach, or potentially leaving that dike breach open and routing a new trail and boardwalk out to connect out to the rest of the trail network. These are just a couple of examples of pedestrian bridges of this size. Again, we're talking about initially an 80-foot wide breach at the top of bank, and these bridges are, this one at the top left's a bit smaller, but these ones here are kind of in that 100-foot span range. For a boardwalk and also pedestrian bridges, we're looking at an example project in the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge near Olympia. And it's a really nice boardwalk system that extends out over the tidelands, the estuary. You can see here in the upper left during high tide, so it's really out over open water during high tide condition, and then at low tide, it's marsh plain and mud flats out there. So again, this is a site that we're looking at as a reference. It does also include a single span pedestrian bridge. So this is I believe it's a Western Woods prefabricated structure that spans one of the main channels out there. There is actually a good lesson learned at Nisqually. When this boardwalk was first put in, I think it said in 2010 or 2008, they spanned this main channel with a 40-foot bridge. And in the time after that, looking here from 2011 to 2019, you can see some bank armoring that had been installed and a lot of erosion that had occurred. So trying to lock that channel in, which ultimately failed. And they have gone back in 2020 and replaced this with a new 90-foot span bridge. So this is kind of a lesson for us. And there's a minimum size certainly for a bridge and a breach channel, but we don't want to constrain that channel so much that we end up with erosion potential. So looking at how wide or large of a bridge really makes sense there to give the channel breathing room to adjust as in the future. And here are just some photos I took when I was out there recently of some of that channel erosion and attempts that were made to stabilize that bank, but ultimately putting in the larger bridge. So under the assessment of Tierra del Mar's stormwater and drainage system, at a minimum, we'll be looking at understanding the drainage patterns within Tierra del Mar, how that water enters Belts Marsh, as we look at locations for a setback dike, where that water would contribute, either inside or outside of a setback dike, wanting to know have a full handle on the inputs off of this watershed as well as off of TDM. We also want to take a look at potential improvements or deficiencies in the system right now, bottlenecks or culverts that could be replaced, and really other ways of improving drainage and some of the ponding that occurs in Tierra del Mar as part of this project or as part of future county projects, but really just to make this whole system function better than it does today. We'll be conducting some initial assessments starting as early as this week. We have some field work coming up on Monday and Tuesday. And then we will also be reaching out or asking you all for additional information about the flooding and drainage conditions in Tierra del Mar. During the previous work, we did receive lots of reports and photo data sets of the flooding conditions from 2015 to 2017 and some of the larger storm events and flood events. These just a few shots from Jasmine Avenue, some of the ponding back there, similar ponding here on Pier Ave. And really a lot of these areas are closed depressional basins that don't really have a good way for water to get out of them. So we'll also be looking at potential ways to drain some of these areas and provide a connection outflow to get that water away. For potential drainage improvements, the Roma Ave culvert is a good example of a bottleneck in the system. This during the storm event in 2017, looking at the upstream end of this culvert, you can see the water is backed up and ponded, trying to get through that culvert. At that exact same time, looking at the downstream end, that water is freely flowing out of the pipe. The water level in the marsh isn't backing that culvert up. It's just the constriction that the culvert itself has. So you can imagine if a bigger pipe was in this location, it would alleviate this, it would allow this water to drain away much faster. And really this bottleneck at the bottom of the system affects drainage capacity all the way really up for the rest of the ditch along San Diego. So that's just one example of potential drainage improvements that we'll identify, see how we can work into the project. This is a shot of kind of an example of maintenance, and since these pipes are quite small, they clog fairly easily. This is a removed section of the pipe. If you look closely enough, you can actually see a kind of a blockage of sediment and debris inside that pipe. And also noting that, I'm curious with this kind of first flush storm event where we just recently had, what some of those inlets look like. And in addition to just upsizing the infrastructure, there's also the maintenance component of that as well. So keeping those inlets clean and flowing. Again, in the previous study, we looked at a lot of this already, again, with some of those photos and reports. And what is shown in this left image are outlines of some of those ponding areas. And we related that to the land surface elevations there and the LiDAR data showing that a lot of that ponding does line up with, ponded depressions that really have no outflow. And then as well as some of the drainage efficiency issues along the culverts and so on. So over the next few months, we'll be getting into this assessment more of the field component, as well as seeking additional input from the residents of Tierra del Mar on known flooding drainage issues, areas that hold water or are ponded during rainfall, how frequently, how long does that water stick around, known blocked drainage ditches or pipe segments, damage or functional deficiencies occurring, and known or desired drainage improvements. If you would like to report anything really at any time, starting from now, you can reach out to the design team. We have Jena's email address provided here. She's the primary contact for the project. So please route questions through her. And then we will also be following up with more formal outreach to people who do respond. And I guess I wanted to add that in addition to the initial work we're going to be doing over the next few days, we're also going to be coming back out during the king tide events that will occur in November and December, tracking storm events as well, and seeing, really if we could just get out there during some of these worst conditions with you all and see the blockages firsthand. So with all that, really the next steps here are, excuse me, the detailed alternatives analysis on its key elements, using the 2D model to evaluate, how those different elements will perform under large storm events and high tide events, working with stakeholders to define a comprehensive preferred alternative for the full project, and then advancing that preferred alternative to a 30% design level, including drawings or plans and basis of design report. This current contract or phase of the project runs through August of 2023, and again, we'll be keeping you all up to speed, involved all along the way. So that concludes our presentations, and we're happy to take any questions from you all. We also have this contact slide here with a lot of the contacts from OPRD, from TEP, Dave Shively at the Nestucca Nesco and Watershed Council, Chris Lady from Tillamook County Public Works, who we're also coordinating with, and just to say that there is a technical advisory team that's folks that have been involved through a lot of the project, as well as some new participants, with representatives from the groups we already mentioned, as well as U.S. Forest Service, Department of Forestry, DLCD, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, ODFW, the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, and Environmental Health. So again, reach out as needed, and happy to answer some questions. Hi there.
The last time that the technical advisory team meeting was not to the public.
They are. They are. So the last time that you were,
yeah.
Yes, all, yep, and
Yeah.
you can handle that, but.
Right now, we just had one and it was fully virtual. It was on Zoom. It was not in person. It was recorded and it will be posted online. In the future, I am open to having members of the public listen. We definitely want to be able to move forward in those. Similar to this, where comments and questions would have to be at the end so that we can have a free discussion without really being interrupted in the topics that we're trying to cover. So stay posted for those. Those will be held with similar timing to these town hall meetings. Basically, as the schedule moves forward, it'll be tech team meeting where we delve in with the scientists and engineers that are supporting this project to really look at the technical aspects of it, and then follow it up with one of these public town hall style meetings so we can disseminate information to those who don't want to sit through a long drawn out technical discussion. So I am open to having those.
The last set of papers all that format. And the
Okay. I'm open to that. I will be talking with state parks, and I'll definitely reach out to the community association. I'm obviously new to this project, so I'm learning, lessons from the past and how everything's been carried out. So thank you.
Transparency.
Yeah. Right.
So it would be helpful to have a decision.
Sure.
So we can get, as we did in the last year, we got that. We were actually on the committee.
I think that TDM Neighborhood Association is representing Leah.
Thank you for taking the question. I don't know where exact representation. In the past, she was on.
Yeah.
I didn't hear any information, so.
Yeah. Amelia is on the Zoom. She's listening in on Zoom today. So she's
Yeah, she was on it.
We also reached out to
Yeah. Yeah, I'm here, everyone.
Yeah, and this first pair of meetings is really just to kind of re-engage with the public. Obviously, things have kind of been on hold over the past couple of years, coming out of COVID and a transition of leadership of the project. And so this meeting is really just to kind of recap where we've been, tell you a little bit about where we're headed with this next phase of work. And the next meetings, both the tech team meeting as well as the public town hall, will really be presenting new information. And so, again, today is kind of a recap and just to touch base with you all. And the next meetings will be full of new information and new findings.
Yeah. We also wanted to introduce ourselves as kind of the new management team, because I'm new with TEP. Dave Shriver is new with the Watershed Council. Since the last round of work on this project, there's been a bit of changes in positions and new people coming together. So just a chance for you all to meet us as well. Do you have any other?
During your video presentation, you mentioned that the modern tailgate, in the term of drainage, the modern tailgate drain only slightly more slowly than the set.
It might be a better question for Hunter.
Okay.
Well, and I guess I'll say what was shown in those animations was essentially our model outputted the graph that you saw at the bottom, what the water levels were there. And Noel was able to take that data and map it to the land surface and show those animations then. So I guess I can't speak for the animation specifically, but maybe ask your question again. I'll see if I can answer.
Setback was modern tailgate. Modern tailgate is only up there for the modern tailgate rather than reach the setback. So it's enormously complicated versus modern tailgate. In the models that were shown, you said that the modern tailgate only means slightly slowly than the setback.
Yeah,
So you have this enormous setback data and the modern tailgate, and the benefit of the drainage is pretty small.
yeah, it was very small, and I based that entirely off just looking at the animation. So I just noticed that effect.
Yeah, and there's quite a different function between the modern tide gate replaced where the current tide gate is to the setback dike option. The main difference there is that with the setback dike and dike breach, it allows the majority of the marsh to be reconnected, fully reconnected to tides, while retaining that flood protection for the south end of the marsh and Tierra del Mar. So the real difference is the location of the dike. And if the tide gate were replaced in its current location, we're still limiting tidal fluctuation and connectivity to the whole marsh. The setback dike option is kind of a compromise where it allows the dike breach to occur, provide full restoration for most of the marsh, but then the setback dike essentially replaces the dike and will include a tide gate. But again, the main difference is that the bulk of the marsh is reconnected while water levels are still controlled in the south end.
The big portion of the project is for usage. So there's a benefit of the drainage.
The benefit of the drainage between those two options.
Then you also mentioned this setback, that would be on the south side of these creeks.
Yes.
So the creeks wouldn't back up behind the.
That's great. Yeah.
Would that benefit Tierra del Mar more than just replacing the flood? That's my question.
Well, and that, that's a great point.
There are times when, quite frankly, honestly, we get these king highs in late December, January. Austin Avenue has a foot of water on top of the gravel street. It's that bad.
And
is this gonna do anything to my street at all? Is it lower the water levels, is it possible to go higher? I mean, this is really unclear what you guys are throwing at us. There's no real arbitrary numbers of what's.
Yeah, well, and what was presented here today is really just an overview of all of the detailed work that's been done to date. But to your point, what we're doing in the next phase of work is really taking a much closer look at drainage and ponding issues within Tierra del Mar, including towards the south end there. But with the previous model that was used, again, we didn't have that high resolution of information of how water is moving through and what the real relations and effects are beyond just one water level projected back into the whole study. And so that's why we're doing this more detailed modeling, is so that we can not only understand, but also demonstrate how the different options would perform in a much detailed way, from not only the basin or the bucket of the marsh, but extending all the way into Tierra del Mar, just to say that our 2D model will provide that level of resolution for the marsh, as well as Tierra del Mar's drainage system and all of the side streets as well. So while, the information and analysis that's been done to date is appropriate for feasibility study, it's still fairly coarse level. And that's why we're doing this next phase of modeling, to really get much more detailed, again, so that we understand it as designers, but also to be able to demonstrate that to you with, model outputs, video animations, similar to the ones that I showed, again, with velocities, water levels, directions of water movement. And we'll be reporting back on that in March, and again, have an open forum for, fully detailed questions about, any point along the model, including Austin.
You did mention something about, I don't know what you roll alternative possibilities of draining some of the streets. I mean, whether you drain it towards the ditch on Sandville Road, or any ideas there?
That's a possibility, yeah. And I guess we haven't done that detailed assessment yet to really identify what those options are. But we'll kind of be looking at all options, frankly, side street.
Yeah, just from observations over the years, when I look on those side streets and I don't see any ditches on those streets, it's like there's no way for that water to get out. It just makes intuitive sense that a roadside ditch would be helpful there, but that will be further figured in the next phase.
Yeah, and to kind of elaborating on that, it could be something from new ditches on the side streets, kind of a buried, kind of a French drain type of buried under drain system, perforated pipe that allows water to get in, or even area drains, so drains that accept the water in those low points and pipes them out to, say, in the Grove ditch, or we'll really be looking at all options for improving those conditions. So the project, again, really does have the tidal wetland connection focus, but because we know that there are ponding drainage issues in Tierra del Mar, again, we want to make sure that this project doesn't worsen those, and if we have an opportunity to improve those through the process, that's really what we're looking at.
That's what my fear is it's going to be worse. They change something that could not worse.
Yeah, and definitely one of the biggest take homes from the modeling and work that was done in the previous phase was that the existing condition that's out there now is really the worst case scenario. It's the existing culvert that drains all that area, including the two creeks, Belton and Menifee.
What protection comes in like that? What if it's not the one that's been contacted? So we force the property owners on the north end, they're higher percentage, not this.
That's another concern I have also, is as the county allows more and more new construction in TLR, that's adding more and more groundwater through these septic systems. It's just going to pond more and more, and I don't know if anybody's thought about that in the future, as they start developing more and more of these lots and putting bigger houses in and tearing little cabins down. Is that going to make it worse in the long run? I mean, if they thought about this, maybe limiting growth. I mean, they're talking about allowing the campground. That's going to impact water level in the winter time. And I wrote a whole thing to Tillamook County on the appeals, and they just didn't.
Well, I'll go ahead, Jason.
Sorry, going back to the difference between the tide gate, modern tide gate on the existing dike and then benefit versus having the setback dike. And one of the main benefits beyond extending the marsh was the extended height of the dike and the width of the dike and just the stronger structure overall to protect the community in those larger 100-year storm events better than the existing dike, is my understanding too.
Yeah, that's great.
We also got 2 culverts on the site. One on my property and one on Floyd.
On the,
And I've taken care of the one on Floyd that's in, we're backing up, and south Floyd, but wetland is flooded all this and stuff. We go down there. It's millions of times that we're
yeah.
the old one was put in there.
That sounds like great information to incorporate.
I was just going to say, I mean, you know, this is exactly the kind of info that we do want to hear from you as we're getting into this detailed assessment of the drainage system and, you know, suggestions like understanding the future projections for development and how that may affect runoff or, you know, septic contributions. And, you know, we want to think into the future from really all perspectives, from potential sea level rise projections, potential for climate change to cause more significant rainfall events, as well as understanding potential changes resulting from development. So, you know, these are great comments and great points. And yeah, like I said, with Jena's email address there, you know, so we do want to hear from you. Tell us exactly what you're seeing out there, what you're concerned about, and through this next phase of work, that's really what we're trying to address. We want to make sure that, like I said, we're not just doing this restoration project in a vacuum, ignoring what's going on outside of it. We really want this whole system to function better in the future for habitat, wildlife, as well as for the people that live there.
And so feel free to email me with questions, photos, and also if you want, we can schedule a time where Hunter and me and any other key personnel can come out to your property and see these photos, see the issues firsthand. We want to take all of that into account. So please reach out and let's set up a time to get your concerns.
and I wanted to get back to Isabel's question about the rate of drainage between the modern tide gate in the existing dike versus the setback dike. And it's important to clarify that that's just with a given an arbitrary size tide gate in each one of those. You could tweak that one way or another, like make the tide gate bigger out on the existing Belts dike and it would drain faster, or vice versa. Is that not correct?
Yeah, definitely. And good point of clarification. So with the new setback dike, it will have a tide gate, and that culvert or structure associated with that tide gate will be much larger also than its current drainage outlet. So that's one factor that's included in the design and determining what size of pipe or box culvert does that need to be, so that when the tide is out and the tide gate opens back up, that new structure is big enough to quickly drain water away from TRMR. So, and as Noel said, you know, we've looked at a couple of configuration options, and really, again, that's why we're getting into much more detail now, so that we understand the issues, understand the controls that we have around those, and understand what we need to design to mitigate those effects.
Across the drainage on some of these streets, you have to overall budget
Okay, so just for the people online, you're just asking if the cost of addressing drainage issues will be wrapped into the overall project budget. And yes, it will be. So I just put together a NOAA grant requesting approximately $1.57 million to take us from where we're at through having the project fully designed and permitted. So that is just for design costs. That doesn't include project construction yet. So essentially that includes all aspects of the project, including the dike breach, recreational connectivity, setback dike, flood protection, potential improvements to the Tierra del Mar community, and all 3 road replacements. Now I want to speak to the not flood protection, not the setback dike, but actually improving drainage within Tierra del Mar. My goal is to be able to gather all the information in fine detail from you folks in the community that own property and live there, and then go through a design process with ESA and actually put together a completed design set that we can hand over to Tuolumne County Public Works, so that for the improvements for actual drainage ditch construction, culvert upgrades, any of that. And so what will come out as a deliverable on the other end of this project will be that design set for your stormwater conveyance improvements within Tierra del Mar that we can then hand to the county public works, and they can come out and make those improvements as designed. We can, so one of our roles at TEP is that we can partner with the county in fundraising and whatnot. The question that you're speaking to is an infrastructure question, right? It's dealing with the stormwater and infrastructure. And like I alluded to before, there's a lot of funding coming out nationally that will go directly into these funding these infrastructure programs. So infrastructure improvement, road improvements, drainage improvements, stuff like that. So we can work with the county to find funding sources to get these things done. This entire project is grant funded, and so yeah, it's me and us having to go out and raise capacity through grants. Currently, we have secured funding through phase 1. I'm seeking funding moving out into phases 2 through 3 right now, which will get us through design and implement and permits. And then once we get closer to having full design sets, then I can start fundraising for construction.
I asked a question, you talk about the movement of fish. What species of fish are you?
Well, certainly coho and, well, historically chum, right? You probably know better than me. I remember you telling stories, I think, of chum.
First, when these meetings started with the FW, they would put resources, any effort in this. This is the time of year. Then we go ahead and do a fish. Yeah, I like to go down that creek. Can't walk the creek. Find out where it's in. TBC.
Yeah.
If there is a reed bed there, they can make gravel. We gotta get fish there.
Yeah, well, we can talk with ODFW and the Forest Service about what kinds of surveys they might have on tap. Didn't you mention that there's a fish study by the Forest Service happening?
They were doing a survey of belts and noting the crossings. And they were doing, I know they're doing temperature loggers on Rickety and belts. Yeah.
Yeah, so I came on the council in November when I'm coming up to speed on this project.
Go to the
They
microphone.
can hear me. Sure. So I'm Dave Shively for folks on Zoom. I'm with the Watershed Council. I came on last November, 11 months ago, and have been coming up to speed on the project. So your point about Department of Fish and Wildlife, maybe having some opinion about whether, their engagement in the project is worth the time and effort, I'll investigate that. I'll talk to our ODFW partners. I have had conversations with ODFW personnel about other projects. I know they're largely supportive of any project which helps to improve aquatic organism passage under any given road. Any road crossing has to deal with aquatic organism passage. So if we're trying to improve those culverts, replace them with culverts or bridges, we certainly have to make sure that fish and other organisms can migrate through those. We're also interested in seeing resident species, lamprey, all have benefits provided by improved crossings. I did observe some coho fry. I'm sure there are coho fry in Renicky. I didn't capture one because they don't have a permit to do that. But they're a threatened species, right, under the Endangered Species Act. And it was very interesting to me. It was in July along the section of Renicky that runs alongside Sand Lake Road. I was looking at that with an engineer, and there were quite a few juvenile coho present.
We also have seen that's.
Yeah, they will.
Another thing I'd add too is it's proper to introduce vegetation inside and encourage waterfowl. We kill a lot of ducks. Whether they're utilizing it as it is now or will utilize it, it's modified. So,
In the marsh. Yeah. No, I'm sure that, that will be an added aspect of the habitat improvements that will happen there. So the goals are to renaturalize. Yeah. And that will have additive effects for all species. The more natural that system, I think, the better all species will perform. It'll be exciting. I'm excited to see this project play out. My role in it will be a little bit more limited to the road crossings and upstream habitat improvements, working with the landowner, OPRD, working with partners like Salmon Superhighway, who are also helping to secure some funding for those future projects. So,
And to speak to the waterfowl aspect, this project is entirely within the Pacific Migratory Flyway. And so there are some groups that are nonprofit groups that are very focused on birds and the species utilizing area that are willing to partner with us in this project. And just to say too, that any vegetation added or planted, any revegetation efforts, those plants will come from our native plant nursery, which is located in Tillamook. So it'll be all coastal genetic stock that's adapted to this bioregion, and it will come through TEP's nursery. So we'll be able to target the species to nudge the ecosystem to move towards target ecotypes. So like Sitka Sedge Swamp, we'll be able to do sedge plugs and whatever else is deemed appropriate once we get to that point in the design work.
And, with a lot of the sites that I work on are the vegetation is much more degraded. Sitka Sedge actually has really nice vegetation and plant communities out there already. And because, as Noel noted, the existing tide gate is broken, it lets water in. Some of that reconnection has already occurred from a salinity standpoint and really setting up for what type of plants are there. And with the reconnection options, we're not necessarily looking at significant revegetation efforts, but we need to understand how will those reconnections affect the vegetation that's out there, and where there are opportunities to restore more spruce swamp, for example, a really rare and valuable habitat type on the coast. Looking for opportunities to foster those plant communities, but again, just saying that vegetation out there already is in good condition.
We already have models also that can be built on top of whatever new surface water model comes out of this effort to determine what the vegetation niches are, the bathtub rings, I like to call them, the bathtub rings around the marsh, because the vegetation is associated with elevation or the depth and duration and frequency of flooding. And we have already trained a model to be able to respond to that and can create maps of where certain species would do well under any given hydrological alteration that we would see in the design.
Isabel, do you have another question?
What about from homes that anything separate project would be the best one changing prices means that because that was prior to these people to history and key part of it, so that the ones that
Yeah.
who served that opportunity when we actually brought back into the project and why. So,
Well, I can give a little bit of background on that, and I think maybe Dave could probably pipe up on this also. But in the past, so there was a grant ask to start working on Reneke and Belts and No Name Creek a couple of years ago by the Watershed Council. And basically the determination from the grantors was, no, we're not going to consider that until you deal with the estuary side. So estuary side has to come first before they will consider funding the stream aspects of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I understand from conversations with board members and predecessor Garshaw, who some of you are probably familiar with. So he had submitted, I believe it was Garshaw, it may have been Haley. Do you know?
Probably
Garshaw, a grant to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, looking at those Belts, Reneke, crossings. And what Noel reported is what I have heard, is that Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board review team determined that it was unclear what the benefits of the projects would be until the Belts dike issue, Belts, the Sitka Tidal Wetlands project had been configured. Right? If they were concerned about investing funds in stream crossings that might not have the intended benefits until the tidal wetlands issues. So,
Yeah, and those culvert replacements are infrastructure upgrades because those culverts are also in bad condition as well. But they're also fish passage focused. So kind of to Dave's point, there's a fish passage barrier, partial barrier out at the existing culvert in Tide Gate. And so the funding agencies really want that first barrier addressed before they put money into the additional barriers moving upstream from a fish passage perspective. And you're right, the function of the restoration, the tidal restoration, depends on what's happening at those creek inflows. And so our model will include the creeks as well. And we'll also be looking at, the existing culverts provide a constriction to water flowing into the marsh. And so in our future conditions model, we will upsize those culverts to simulate what it would be like when water is freely flowing into the marsh. So we will be incorporating those into our modeling and analysis. And then also to say, it's not necessarily when the opportunity arises to address those culverts, that's almost a certainty that those will happen as well. And the county is very eager to see Reneke Creek replaced soon. And there is movement on addressing those pieces of the project as well. But as we said, these systems, in a sense, do function separately. And again, there's kind of an upstream movement of fish passage barrier removal. So that's kind of why the project has been parsed out separately. But we are incorporating those into our model as well.
I know they did some wood work and it's been like you expect.
Yeah.
Almost flooded the whole thing.
Yeah.
I got that wood paint. And so whereas before, it was it is a larger fish. Fish
Yeah, and the crossing, oh, sorry. You wanna say
No.
something?
I
Oh,
can chime in. So the county is moving ahead with size, type, and location design on Renke Creek Crossing as we speak. So the county is already starting to move towards that crossing that you just brought up. Now, Renke Creek, if you look at this figure, is a good one for it. Renke Creek is up here on the north end of the project, and so this culvert replacement is going to move ahead first, because these two, Belts Creek and East Marsh, you can see potential interactions with the setback dike location. So we need to understand where this structure is going to end up before we can really get into the fine details of modeling for these two. So there's kind of an order of operations moving ahead with each of these elements. And as far as design work for all of these, I did include funding for all three of these replacements in my most recent large grant request. So I am currently seeking funding to put towards these crossings that will funnel through TEP to the Watershed Council of the County for service studies that need to happen to move these projects forward as well, kind of in parallel with the Marsh project.
And there are duplicative efforts to secure funding, which is a good thing too.
Yeah.
So if Jena's grants aren't successful, we have the same Sitka Sedge, which is also requesting funding for design on these three crossings. We have the ability to shift the funds around too. If, say, Jena is successful with her funding, it's in super high types of projects. But yeah, we're constantly thinking ahead, trying to stay 2 steps ahead in terms of securing funding for design work, and then understanding when construction might actually be possible, and able to go to work in watershed enhancement board funding as well. When do we need to request those construction plans, those implementation plans?
And like I mentioned earlier, as we move forward and start to secure more funding for this, I'll be presenting that in the tech team meetings and to the public meetings so that everyone's aware of who's funding these projects, where the money's coming from, who the players are. And so we're going to be very transparent and open with that with everybody.
Thank you.
thanks, everybody.
The hope is to help. The hope is to help all the different elements. The running of the city.
Yeah. So for those of you on Zoom, we are going to stop recording now. Reach out with any questions, and thank you for joining us.
Right, yes, yeah.